Hello and welcome to today's special episode of Nucleus Investment Insights. Today we wanted to do a follow-up on our previous episode about the Australian energy prices due to the ructions in the energy market this week. On the agenda, we'll have a look at the similarities and differences between the West Coast and the East Coast energy markets. Again, we'll have a look at the coal and gas prices as they're the primary energy inputs. Next, we'll explore the concept of microgrids and the transition to renewables. And most importantly, we'll also explore the political aspect and look at the vested interests. Then, as always, at the end, we'll explore the investment implications. My name's Sam Kerr. I'm the Senior Financial Advisor at Nucleus Wealth. Today, as always, I want to welcome the Founder and Chief Investment Officer at Nucleus Wealth, Damien Klassen. Damo, thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Sam.
We also have David Llewellyn-Smith, our Chief Strategist. Dave, thanks for joining us as well.
Pleasure. Thanks, Sam.
And today on the show, we have Katharine McKenzie, an energy policy specialist and lawyer. She has her own consulting company, MACT Consulting, which focuses on energy transition and decarbonisation policy. So, Katharine, welcome to the show.
Thanks very much, Sam. Good to be here.
Excellent. It's going to be an interesting discussion today. It's obviously a hot topic. So just a quick reminder before we get started. If you enjoy our content, please subscribe to our YouTube channel and click the bell below to be notified when we go live or have a new episode recorded. Alternatively, you can follow us on your preferred podcast platform. Our show's available on all the majors. Excuse me. So now we've got that housekeeping out of the way, we'll get started. So Damo, I'll hand it over to you to lead us away.
Yeah, sure. So what I wanted to explore today was, there's this idea that we've got three sort of different separate markets in Australia. There's Northern Territory, where prices seem to be fine. There's we had prices of $68 last week on average, and then we have the national energy market where they had cap prices at $300. Then they've when nobody would supply, they've needed to step in and take control of that market. So, we've obviously got some very different markets, and it seems to me that on the East Coast and in the national energy market, everyone just throws their hands up and goes, well, there's some things not working. There's we've got some high gas prices. This is a market, we just got to live with it. And I guess what I wanted to do is sort of compare and contrast with Western Australia and say, well, just a minute, we've got a couple of markets that are working. What can we do to fix that? And that's where so we've brought Katharine on as an expert on the West Australian market. She's sort of been heavily involved in that, and so I might sort of throw it to you, I guess, to start with, maybe to give just a little bit of your background, and then into what you see as sort of the big differences between the East Coast and the West Coast market.
Thanks very much, Damien. Yeah, so my background, I started out as an energy lawyer, working across energy supply and transportation contracting, as well as doing regulatory work for government and helping them with policy development. But following the 2017 WA state election, I went to work for the then Treasurer and Energy Minister, Ben Wyatt, and then on to work with Bill Johnston after that. Through my time, I led the energy transformation strategy and sat on the energy transformation task force. I was involved in the renewable hydrogen work sitting on the council there, as well as a raft of other initiatives that we looked at around the Northwest Interconnected System, which is another system in WA, and then also some work around standalone power systems and microgrids. So since leaving government, I'm now working across decarbonisation of hard-to-abate supply chains and looking at really what's needed into the future around energy supply.
Excellent. So you were sort of, the WA government looked at joining the national energy market at some stage, I guess.
Yeah. So.
Are you regretting that decision not to join?
No. It's really funny. So when I came in as principal advisor, the first thing I got asked about was, what do you think about the about the various policy pieces of work that are underway that was started under the previous government, and should we be joining the national electricity market? And there are a few other design pieces that were being looked at. And at that time, whilst it was seen that there would be some efficiencies that might come from joining the electricity market, particularly through the network regulation side of things. The feeling was that it would be giving up autonomy for WA. It would be adding some complexity where, we have quite a different market, and I'm happy to talk to that in a moment. And it was really trying to kind of fit a square peg into a round hole. So, in WA, we have a much, much smaller market than the national electricity market. Our system is isolated from other...
Smaller in terms of not really size, how it's strung out, more about the concentration. Sorry, the number of people, I suppose.
Absolutely, yeah. So the number of gigawatts is much less on our system. The number of customers is much less, but we actually have a really significant geographic footprint. And so, with that large geographic footprint, but not having that same amount of density, that creates issues as well. So I think around about 50% of our system actually services only 3% of customers. So there's a whole bunch of cross subsidy that happens between metro customers and regional customers, which is, a policy decision made by government many years ago. So so we are a distinctly different system and market to the east. And because we don't have as many players in the system, we have some design features that are quite different as well. So we've had a reserve capacity mechanism in place since, around about 2006. And that was really introduced to ensure that, when there's a shortage in supply and players are absolutely killing the pig on prices, that you're actually going to have the new build of generation, and people don't decide to just hold off on bidding into the market or hold off on building new supply because it means they'll be putting up more capital and potentially making less money. So it was really about how do we set up a smaller system to ensure that we've got that safety net in place, almost like an insurance policy. And so with that, it means that in our energy market, it's capped. The cap changes each year depending on different factors, but it's capped sort of around the 300 mark.
And so also, like, it's government run electricity, isn't it? The prices are set every year, and here's what the price is going to be, and so And so there's a lot more responsibility with that, though, isn't there? Like, in terms of, if energy prices go up by 20%, it's your fault as a state government. Where at the moment they can all throw their hands up and go, "Well, we're part of the national electricity market. Is it his fault? Is it their fault? Is it her fault?" Like, everyone's just sort of somebody else.
Perhaps I can give a bit more color around that. So our electricity network, our poles and wires, is owned and operated by a government-owned energy business called Western Power. And then in terms of generation, there's actually numerous privately owned generators in the market, but the generator with the largest portfolio is in fact government owned, and that is Synergy. And Synergy is also an electricity retailer to both CNI and residential customers, and it actually has a monopoly over residential and small business customers that consume up to 50 megawatt hours per annum. So as you say, it's not all government owned and run, but a significant proportion of it is. And so that comes with pros and cons. From a political perspective, if things are going wrong, then it does squarely sit with government to step in. And it also means, though, that action can be taken more swiftly when you're only dealing with one government. So we, WA, whilst we're not part of the national electricity market, the WA ministers do attend what was then known as the Council of Australian Governments Energy Council, and now has changed since COVID started. They do participate in that, but they don't have to go through the wrangling that the East Coast ministers and federal ministers have to go to get agreement around changes to the national electricity market.
Yeah. Now, when you look at the national electricity market, they make a relatively big deal about, it's one of the world's longest and, broadest and all that type of stuff. And I guess from my perspective, I look and go, well, there's lots of other countries and lots of other jurisdictions around the world where you don't have big markets, and a lot of West Australian is devolving into microgrids now. So, is there, there's obviously this pitch that, lots of different markets means that, when one's using lots of power, the other one might not be, and wind might be blowing in South Australia and not in other places and things like that. But you also run into that case of everyone's, if there's underinvestment, then everyone hopes that somebody else will make up the difference. I guess, how do you see what the optimal size is? Do you need to have millions of customers, or actually are we going to sort of eventually devolve into some microgrids, which are actually might be just as good or similar in terms of what the prospects are?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's a one-size-fits-all kind of thing. So in WA, because we have that population spread and we don't have that same density as some of the other markets have, there are going to be sections of our current grid that it actually makes sense to cut off the power lines when they're ready for retirement and have standalone power systems or microgrids, because there's ways now of supplying those customers through a bit of renewables and battery storage, and perhaps a little bit of diesel and eventually renewable hydrogen backup. That, in some circumstances, that is actually cheaper than maintaining hundreds of kilometres of lines. But then there's going to be, other things where as we move to more renewable energy and you're wanting to connect to that renewable energy, it makes sense to have those kilometres of lines out to them to bring that into the load centres. And I think also as you try to make...
So you're talking about places like Perth, for example, is like saying, yeah, okay, it makes more sense to have a big solar farm near Perth and pipe it all in, as opposed to trying to take up a solar farm near Perth and pipe it all the way up to Karratha or something like that.
Yeah, so you kind of look to, in all of this, you're sort of weighing up where do you get the best wind and solar resources, where are your load centres, and then, what's the best options in terms of transmission. So when you look at your electricity cost stack, quite often the cost of the transmission is anywhere between sort of 30 and 50% of that cost stack. So you want to be really driving the best outcome for your transmission as well. And so, taking into account those factors, it's going to look different for different parts of the world and different parts of the country as well. So for Perth, our main electricity system is called the Southwest Interconnected System, and to go from there all the way up to the Pilbara is just such astronomical distances that it probably doesn't make sense to do that. But having said that, though, when you look around the Midwest of WA, there's some really fantastic wind and solar that you might want to connect up to, and so you would be building out those lines. The more geographic spread that you have as well in terms of the renewables, it means that if you are connected up to other parts, as the sun's going down in one part, you can still take the benefit of the sun that's still up in other parts. So there are benefits that come with that geographical spread as well, but it's all about how do you optimize across the yield from the renewables and the transmission costs, etc.
Yeah, no, and so I mean, one of the big factors we certainly look at is this idea that effectively what you're trading off between is transmission versus storage, and so and battery costs have been coming down quite dramatically, but maybe they're going to stall where they are for a little bit, as just the shift in Europe to everyone trying to get much storage as possible, and the rise in all these prices sort of having. But we do think there's a sort of a continued trend in terms of those costs coming down. Where do you sort of see the cross? And I'm assuming that, I mean, there's been a little bit in transmission, in in China in terms of the ultra high voltage lines in terms of innovation. But I guess one thing is it doesn't seem to me as if there's much low hanging fruit in the transmission. And so I guess where do you see the sort of crossover in terms of if battery costs sort of halved from where it was today, would that change your view on do you start hooking this transmission up, or is it or does it need to go further than that before you start saying, okay, actually no, the relative cost is no longer worth it?
It's a really fantastic question. I don't think I have a perfect answer for you on that. I think probably one of the fabulous engineers that I work with would be better placed to answer that question, but it's a really good one.
Okay, no worries. Dave, have you got any questions you want to?
I'm just wondering, Katharine, when you talk about the load centres and you've got private generators, so does the WA market, like the Southwest Grid, for instance, operate on the similar kind of bid stack that we've got in the NEM, like where you have this kind of rolling auction to supply capacity, or how what's the pricing mechanism, I guess, is what I'm asking, in the WA system?
Yeah, so for a lot of large users and the retailers, they'll have bilateral agreements in place with the generators. So a significant amount of our market is bilaterally traded. And then we have what's called the balancing market, which generators are required to bid in what they have. And so, in terms of then what gets dispatched, it's really done on price. But also we are going through a change in the I guess, there's some changes also underway around essential system services and things like that. And so as part of that dispatch, it will also be looking at what's the most efficient outcomes in terms of essential system services as well. But again, it does come down to price and where they sit in the bid stack.
Is that similar split between contracts and spot as we've got over here? Like, do you know, like the volumes?
So I'd need to double check. My understanding was certainly in the past that there was a higher proportion of bilateral contracts here in WA than over East, and that they look a little bit different in terms of how they're, the language that's used and how they're sort of structured. I think over East you talk more about contract for difference, whereas in WA they just talk about bilateral trading agreements.
And sorry, you go.
No, that's okay. Has there been any fuel cost pressure in WA, or any pressure on the spot markets in terms of prices?
The really interesting thing that we've seen around prices and what's really dominating the policy agenda at the moment is actually around the impacts that rooftop solar is having. So in addition to having a price ceiling, we also have a price floor, and that price floor is negative $1,000. And so with the flooding of rooftop solar into the market, it means that those prices are going negative a lot more frequently, and that puts pressure on generators as well. And so for the coal players, where they're sort of forced to, they either need to stay on at a certain amount so that they can be dispatched later, or shut off completely. And so there's pressures, particularly on coal-fired plant, in relation to that, where they're having to operate in a way that they're not really used to, but then they're also copping those negative prices where they're having to pay to be on as well. So that's at this point in time, that's the main pressure.
And hence the government's moving towards closing some of those down, I guess.
Absolutely. Yeah. So the big news in WA this week was the announcement that all of the state-owned coal-fired generation will be closed by 2029. So when I was working for the minister, we had announced that one of the coal units would close this year and another one in 2024. But the most recent announcements is that our largest coal generator will close in 2027 and the remaining plant in 2029.
How many private coal generators are there?
Just one.
Just one.
So that's the newest one that we have in our system. But I think in the last year or two, it was written down and obviously gone through some struggles. And then in terms of the actual coal fields themselves, they've been under a lot of pressure as well. And so, of course, as you start to plan for the retirement of coal plant, that also creates issues for those organisations that use coal, not just for electricity, but directly as part of their processing as well.
And so how does the WA government contain those pressures? Like at the moment, for instance, federally, we have this rolling crisis, and the new government, obviously just getting its feet under the table is, a bit timid, and so we have a circumstance where some of those interests that are either, deriving economic rents or suffering as a result of the pressures are lobbying their butts off and gaining a lot of power and influence over policy. So how does WA contain those interests? Is there any particular advantages it has on that front?
Well, I guess with having the largest generator and retailer in WA being government owned, it does mean that government has a lot more control over that and can give directions to those government owned energy businesses. It does mean though that government is the one that and therefore taxpayers are the ones that sort of bear the cost of that and the cost of the transition. But it means there's a real deep understanding of what's going on and a lot of work being done to help work through all of this. So, it's not just a matter of deciding we're going to cop, the impacts of closing all of that coal plant ahead of time. There's also work being done to see how can we actually better harness that renewable energy that's flooding the system from, residential players to make the most of that. So there's a pilot underway known as Project Symphony, which is essentially a virtual power plant. And so it looks at how can you better manage the inflows from the rooftop solar, how can you use other things on the demand side like air conditioners as well to help deal with that. And part of that pilot is also looking at how can you then bid that into our electricity market as well. And again, though, because Synergy, the government-owned gentailer, has a monopoly over the residential market, it means that that aggregation of rooftop solar is still under or within the sort of scope of control of government as well.
Because it makes a lot of sense to say, regardless of whether you like markets or don't like markets and all that type of stuff, when you're going to go through a big structural change, it obviously makes more sense to say, well, essentially driven, largely monopoly in a lot of areas, is going to be a lot better at managing that change rather than sort of somebody who says, well, hopefully price will sort it out and some people will give up the right time and other people will keep going and will be good.
Well, it's herding cats.
Yeah. Well,
there's still plenty of cat herding that goes on in WA as well. Don't worry.
Yeah. But I guess it's that issue as well of going. I mean, this is where I'm sort of coming from the point of view of going, look, we've spent a fair amount of energy and effort on this whole national energy market, and they started ripping us off by charging us too much for poles and wires, and then we needed the ACCC to come in and go, oh no, guys, and you got to wind it all back, and there's this constant are these guys ripping us off or not? And the latest one this week of like, okay, they've all shut down they're not providing bids anymore. Is that just because they want to get the higher prices from if AEMO comes in and forces them? Whereas when you've got your own generator, you've got a lot more insight into, how come our poles and wires don't cost as much as everyone else's? Oh, okay, they're gold plating them. You pick up that a lot faster, or no, we're happy to bid into the price, or no, actually we genuinely can't. Okay, maybe we need to look at a different scenario. But so if you win a up to this podcast, Mr. Albanese jumps on the phone, or Mr. Bowen maybe jumps on the phone to you and says, "Hey, I really need a consultant." Everything's on the table. Do we blow up the national energy market and go back to sort of smaller things? Do we do more of what we're doing? Because it seems to me at the moment the answer seems to be just keep doing whatever got us here. Just keep doing more of it. As what would your advice be?
Now that you have the national electricity market, I wouldn't be suggesting that you blow it up.
How long would it? Well, okay, well, but
metaphorically or physically.
Yeah. Okay, but on those markets, let's say we had a rolling 5 years of this.
Yeah.
At that point, do you say it's broken, or how long till you say it's broken?
Well, we've had a rolling 7 years of it already.
Yeah. I think that so there's a few things. So first of all, I think that one of the things that was disappointing coming out of COVID was doing away with the Council of Australian Governments Energy Council and the processes and protocols that go with that. So I think actually thinking from a governance perspective around decision making and how the ministers work together and how they sort of interact with AEMO and AEMC and the Energy Security Board. I'm obviously not attending those meetings anymore, and perhaps things have moved forward, but I think that was a step back during a really critical time where decisions needed to be made in a timely manner. So what I would say is, first of all, look at the governance that sits around that. I think that there is a need to think about how do you ensure you've got sufficient supply, and then also thinking about how much lead time do you actually need to be giving in terms of power plant closures as well. And in WA, with those recent announcements that were made about the closure of coal plant, there's quite a few years there to plan for what needs to be done to make the system operator feel comfortable that they have what they need to keep the system secure and keep the lights on, and also, make sure that prices don't go completely out of control. So thinking about what's the lead time for plant closures. Part of the reserve capacity mechanism that we have, so yes, it does pay generators to make sure that their generation is available, and they are penalised if they are not available when they're called on. So they essentially have to put up security when they get their credits, and so they do get a bit of a whack when they're not available, and they have to answer a please and explain as well. So I do think there is some real merit in looking at a form of a reserve capacity mechanism for the East Coast as well.
The poles and wires. So, I guess there's so we spoke a little bit earlier about WA is ripping out poles and wires in certain cases, and there's this push shove between how cheap batteries are versus how much transmission is. I guess I don't know. What insights do you have on microgrids as a how many people do you sort of feel is sort of your quorum before you say, I'm assuming you go, okay, I'm not going to have a microgrid with 5 houses, but is it 5,000 houses? Is it 50,000? Is it 500,000? What sort of level do you think of as a microgrid?
Yeah, it's an interesting one, and I think WA, already has like I think it's roughly 37 microgrids across Horizon Power's patch. So outside of our main power grid, we have a vertically integrated government-owned energy business known as Horizon Power, and they have to manage all of those microgrids. And so I guess it's just, again, coming back to that issue of how densely populated is an area, what are the options for supplying energy to them, and then what's kind of the most economically efficient outcome in terms of what you link up with poles and wires. The work that's been done in Western Power's patch, where they are looking at decommissioning lines, I think that you can look at a standalone power system for one property or a couple of properties, but I think once you have quite a lot more properties, then it does make sense to look at a microgrid. Exactly what those settings are, I think it's a case-by-case basis.
Right. And the costs, I guess you're just in sort of, I guess, relative terms, so if we're putting a microgrid for whatever it is, a couple of thousand people somewhere, are you thinking about that as being like twice the cost of running the rest of your, running it, say, to somebody in Perth, or is it more like, sort of 20% more or 50% more? I don't know. Is there sort of just a ballpark figure in terms of, I guess I'm interested in the, if it's at parity, you go, well, why don't you just have lots of microgrids? And if it's 10 times more, you go, okay, well, that's why we don't have microgrids. But, just trying to work out the rough relative.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I sort of think about it of what's the avoided cost of having a microgrid versus, building the lines out to them to connect them up to the main system.
Yep.
And so I guess it's the point that, most cases where they are really far from the main sort of load centres and they're far away from the generation as well, it will typically be cheaper than having the poles and wires out to them. Again, it depends on, how many kilometres that you're looking at.
But there's there is a, you still have this idea that everyone's paying the same price in WA. So as you said, some people are subsidising other people. I'm just interested in knowing, I guess, roughly how much that subsidy is. I guess it's coming from that. I guess what I'm coming to is that argument about going, well, if you can run a microgrid at the same cost as what you can run it to give somebody to Perth, then you should have microgrids everywhere. You know what I mean? And I know that's not the case, but I'm just not sure how far away that is in terms of battery costs.
I'd probably defer to some of the really fabulous engineers at Western Power who've been running the numbers on this. So I do have an understanding of what the cost to serve is across the network, where it is all connected up. I have a sense of the multiples of how much more expensive it is for those on the fringe of the grid versus those that are very much in the core metro area as well. I'd need to visit some of the public documents to see how much I could share on that.
Well,
but there's, So what I would say is the wonderful Jessica Shaw, who is the member for Swan Hills in WA. She was the head of the Economic Standing Committee in WA and did a fantastic inquiry into microgrids in WA. And I would need to sort of refresh myself on the detail that went into there to sort of comment on that. But that's a really fantastic place to look for information on these things.
Yeah, so that was from a couple of years ago, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was.
Interested in seeing where the costs from the daily. Anyway,
so what's the renewable penetration then in WA now? Have we lost Katharine?
Momentarily.
Whoops.
You
dropped out.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so I think the thing with this is that where are we? So WA still had a reasonable amount of coal. So where are we? So I think WA is sort of at the moment. Actually, this one's actually got it mixed up between coal, oil, gas, and renewables. So I'm not actually quite sure whether this. I suspect it actually must include transport as well, David. So this one's got that coal is 10%, oil as oil is 30%, gas as heaps more, 50-ish%, and so maybe 10% renewables. Not many in terms of renewables. So it's still still relatively low. I guess relative to most other states, it's low, and gas is sort of the main one. But as Katharine spoke about, there's a lot of microgrids that sort of the sort of 30 odd different microgrids set up in WA, and they're at that point of just going, okay, it's far cheaper for us just to rip out all the poles and wires, stick in batteries, stick in oil generators as well as like the final backup, but lots of renewable energy sort of pumping into the batteries, and that's sort of keeping everyone going. And then when whatever happens, lots and lots of cloudy days, plus no wind blowing, plus whatever else, then you can switch to oil generated power if you need to. And I think that's the point about the. I think you spoke a little bit about the green hydrogen. That's potentially something where that might step in instead. I think the economics, though, for me, the economics of the whole green hydrogen as you back up is pretty tough. It's probably better than oil in terms of the economics, but it's would it be better than oil? It'd be similar to oil. So, and oil's very expensive as a backup for these. So you're talking the oil, is sort of like 2 or 3 times the cost of the other ones. So some of the other things for the actually, so we've got that ACCC one up there, sort of showing that how much of the average gas bill actually goes to transmission. So already we've got 45% of last year we had 45% of the energy cost was the network. The prices has changed that, so that'll now be, it might be a third now, but it's not because it's changed, but more because the cost of the wholesale energy has shot up so far. I've got another chart there to sort of that East Coast, West Coast, just sort of showing that, the prices are pretty normal West Coast at the moment. Maybe a little bit higher than usual, but it might be 10 or 20% higher rather than 6 times higher.
So basically, the WA energy system is similar to the US.
Yeah. Yep.
Where they've used gas to decarbonise, considerably, shut down a lot of coal and continuing to do so, getting some penetration from renewables, and they've used domestic reservation to make that work.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess that's the issue, I suppose, with the plans I keep seeing, or the discussion points feel like they're coming from vested interest for me in terms of the plans we've got to fix the national energy market seem to be the people who got us here, explaining that, I sell gas, so you need some more gas, and Sam sells poles and wires, so he's telling us we need more poles and wires, and so.
So it looks like we've lost Katharine, have we? What's happened? Is there been a solar flare or something?
Yeah. Maybe power's down in WA.
I wanted to ask her about the idea of piping gas east, which is Colin Bynet's great idea.
But no, that was but already they've ruled that out, piping gas east, I thought. Sorry, they're happy to do it, but it's not as part of the reservation. It's basically in I think they were quite specific about
Yeah.
saying
Well, they don't want the rest of Australia ruining their excellent reservation policy.
yeah, that's right. And for the rest of Australia, that's a real, I don't want to use the language, but a real effing cop out, isn't it? Saying, okay, we're not gonna reserve the gas on the east coast, but how about you have some of the reserved gas on the west coast?
Pipe your reserve gas over here.
Yeah, exactly. You guys did the smart thing. Why don't we just piggyback off yours? And
yeah,
so,
that's the kind of stuff that gets you to secession movements.
yeah. So, and then the other chart that's worth having up there is just this idea of this move to renewables, and it's going to accelerate. I guess I've got a chart just sort of showing where this is Europe, actually looking at Europe moving across to renewables, because that's sort of obviously the key part with the Putin side. But yeah, the key issue there is there's actually not much movement at all in the first few years, and this is assuming that you sort of grow your solar power, your solar production and batteries by sort of 20% per annum in terms of how many more batteries and how many more solar panels you can make, and then switch to sort of 10% per annum after 2030. And the issue is it goes quite slowly for the first few years, but then it really accelerates. It's not a linear relationship, and so as you put on more and more capacity, that's going to sharply accelerate across from I think I've just got a message from Katherine. She's suffering some technical difficulties. Sam, do you want to have a quick look? Dave, maybe have you got any thoughts on what we've seen this week, I guess, from AEMO? Does the government actually get it? That's a key question. Do they get what the problem is?
Well, I don't know whether they don't get it or they're being paid to not get it. It's pretty much what it boils down to. I mean, there's absolutely nothing that Chris Bowen or Madeleine King has said this week that has made any sense whatsoever. The fundamental problem on the East Coast is very straightforward. Yes, there are lots of long-term challenges in terms of microgrids, poles and wires, the renewable build-out, etc. But that's not the problem we have right now. The problem we have right now is fuel cost. Very, very straightforward. Gas is too expensive and coal is too expensive. And nobody in the government is saying that. And that's the only problem that they have at the moment. They went to the election with a platform to build the NEM out to to net zero in 2050, which I'm sure it's well thought through, and no doubt we'll get there. But that's not the problem we face today. And they keep using that plan as a solution to today's problem, and it's a different problem altogether. And the only fix is to lower those fuel costs, which is very easy to do as well, and in any pub test would be swiftly endorsed by all and sundry, other than the 12 or 15 companies that will suffer as a result, suffer a little.
Hey, we've got Katherine back.
Hello. It's all right.
Well, what we were worried about is that your power is still switched on. That's what but then we remembered you're not in Sydney, so it's probably all right. Yeah.
Full 22-degree day, and the sun is shining and there's not too many clouds, because it means there will be so much rooftop solar that boots everything else off the system. Right. So
and
that's when we worry.
And nobody's got the air conditioners on or the heaters.
Yeah. Exactly right. Exactly right.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, actually,
so we were just discussing the considerable role of gas in your generation. Could you give us just a bit précis on how much there is and how it's managed, etc.?
Yeah, absolutely. So So obviously gas plays a large part of generation, but it's not its only purpose in WA. So the Dampier to Bunbury natural gas pipeline, I think, shifts up to around 1,100 terajoules of gas. In terms of our electricity market on average, I think the gas use is around about the 30% mark. We we've got quite a lot of gas generation in place. In our spot market,
has that been growing?
there hasn't, in recent times, there hasn't been much in the way of new build. So there was a period of time where there'd been quite a proliferation of gas-fired generation, but not in recent times. And the announcement this week from WA government was that it wouldn't be seeking to build any new gas plant from 2030. But also I'd be quite surprised if they were building any themselves between now and 2030 as well, because there is substantial gas generation. That obviously doesn't preclude the private sector from building gas peaking plant, and you may see that happen over the next decade. But really, a lot of the focus is around renewable energy resources and the role that they can play in the system.
Yep.
So I'm not sure where you got to on the rough sort of breakdown of generation, but I think it's around about 18%, on average 18% wind, around about 2% for large scale solar, or no, less than 2% large scale solar, and then another sort of 12 or so % rooftop solar, but that's growing every year by around about 300 megawatts. So it continues to play a much larger role in our system.
Now,
But yeah, you go.
In terms of the rooftop solar, so I mean, there's this idea, obviously, that everyone can have their batteries, and you can start controlling that batteries as to when it lets power back in. It does seem that it would be more, if you were centrally planning it, it would seem more efficient to use community batteries. So as a part to go, well, do I need to stick on a battery on my house that's got all this capacity that I actually never use? I've got it there in case of a 10-day cloudy day situation or whatever. Whereas, and so I'm actually not using all that capacity. Whereas if it's in a community batteries, you could sort of better associate it with what's needed. But obviously there's that flip between, okay, well, it's, people own their own solar. So does that mean they should own their own battery or so what are your thoughts around sort of the battery situation in terms of, is it do you think it'll be left to the individuals or community, or more sort of network wide?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a really big fan of community batteries. So while I was in the minister's office, we rolled out numerous community batteries, and they were incredibly popular across the different electorates. I think it really comes down to choice. So there's obviously provision there for those with rooftop solar to rent their space in a community battery. And I think in the future, you might even see those without rooftop solar, being able to reserve part of that battery and the energy in it as well, as a way of, not having to put in their own rooftop solar, which might be really popular for renters, for instance. At the moment, government's taken the approach that it's really about consumer choice, and it's really up to the consumers whether they want to put in batteries themselves or go with the community battery option. But I think you're absolutely right, Damien. In terms of the community battery, it does provide that greater control for Western Power to manage things on their distribution system. And I think also it means that residents don't have to take up space in their garage or wherever they put it. There's obviously safety benefits of having it, outside of your property as well, in case of fire and things like that. So I think there's a lot of reasons why community batteries make sense, but it's recognising that sometimes people want.
Have they been successful in urban areas as well?
Yeah, so we have community batteries sort of spread across our main power grid, and so yeah, I mean, not directly in the central business district as such, but certainly, we've got them across Margaret River and around Rockingham and various other places across Perth. And so it's not just for remote regional areas that you would have something like that.
How does the community go about deploying something like that? Like, where do they find the space for the battery, for instance? Like, do they go through council, or what does the community do?
So in WA, the community batteries have been purchased and operated by Western Power, the government-owned network provider. And so in trying to help the costs stack up, you're not just relying on, what you're renting out that bit of space in the battery at, but actually deferred investment in the network to deal with that influx of rooftop solar as well. So there's network benefits that you derive from them, and that helps bring down the cost to make it more affordable for residents. And so that's done through Western Power, and so then they will work with that. It might be on land that they already own, or it might be working with local councils. So certainly in Margaret River, that was something that they did with local council, and it's on local council land.
I can see this being immensely popular over here. So, if you've stacked your solar and you've rented your portion of a community battery, are you effectively off grid? Like, is that self-sufficient? Is there enough capacity in that setup?
So it would really just depend on how you've sized it, and also your own consumption behavior as well. One of the funny things is there's some residents that put in rooftop solar and end up just using a whole lot more electricity.
Right.
So and also recognizing, that the sun isn't always shining, so it depends on when that consumption actually happens, and then how much storage are you renting in the community battery, or how much of your own storage have you put in, as to whether or not you're completely self-sufficient. And I suppose it's a further step then to actually disconnect yourself from the power grid. And so, that's something that we haven't really seen taken up in WA. You hear people talk about defecting from the grid and being completely self-sufficient, but you actually are then limiting your options. So at
I
the
guess
moment,
I'm just more thinking of it in terms of escaping the policy mismanagement over here. So self-sufficient in the sense that, maybe you can get away from it, create a cheaper
yeah,
configuration
and I guess
for
that's
your home power than simply sitting there and being abused by a cartel.
Yeah, certainly. Certainly, it means that you are sort of insulated from the increasing prices of electricity on the system. So, when you get your electricity bill, or at least in WA, when you get your electricity bill, you have sort of a fixed fee component that you pay. And then you also have kind of your variable component. And so typically, the electricity consumers will continue to pay that fixed daily supply charge, but they're obviously insulated from the variable charges that come through. So it can certainly be a fantastic option for those that do want to, I guess, protect themselves from increasing prices. And I think also recognizing that in having that generation and storage in place, there's a potential role that you can play in the markets in the future as well, where you end up having a bit of passive income as well from having those assets in place.
So yeah, selling power back when prices spike.
Yeah. So like I mentioned before, in WA we've got Project Symphony, that's looking at how you can better aggregate and coordinate those distributed energy resources like rooftop solar storage and air conditioning, heat pumps, etc. And the next sort of wave of work is how can you then bid that into the market and make sure that you're getting something out of that. In WA, we do have what's called the Distributed Energy Buyback Scheme. So up until I think it was last year, Synergy, our monopoly retailer in the residential market, had to purchase any solar that you put back into the system at around about 7 cents. The distributed energy buyback scheme sort of changed it up a bit and said if you're putting into the system after 3 p.m. you get 10 cents, and it's really encouraging people to put in storage, but then also potentially being able to make some money off that as well.
Yeah. So now on hydrogen, I guess I'll tell you my take on it, and I'd be interested to see where you think I might be going wrong. So I look at it and go, to me, it's just a form of storage. Like I start with electricity. I go and spend that electricity to create hydrogen. I then go burn that hydrogen to turn it back into electricity and do whatever I want to do with it. And the round trip's very expensive. It's sort of somewhere between 60 and 80% energy lost in that process. So I guess that's the downside. The technology's been around for 100 years or more, so there's probably not a lot going to be done. There's unlikely to be miracle breakthroughs. It's going to bring the cost down substantially, but maybe there's around the edges. Okay, so we've got that side, and then I go, okay, but storage is really cheap. So whereas a battery, like if I want to fill up a battery, so batteries are great if I'm like, yeah, okay, I fill my battery up during the day and I use it at night because I've only got to store it for 6 or 7 hours, whatever. I don't need that much. But if I need to store it for like 5 days, now it starts to get really expensive. Whereas hydrogen, storing it for a long time is, the actual cost of the storage and scaling the storage isn't much once I've got the process of getting it in and out. And so I can actually quite cheaply store, or much more cheaply than say a battery, I can store 10 days worth of power. Whereas if I only want it for, I do it during the day and I use it at night, then hydrogen's incredibly expensive because the storage, it's just not worth storing it for 6 hours. Is that how you look at it, or where do you think I might be going wrong?
Well, first of all, I'd say there's so many different uses for hydrogen.
Okay, so yeah, I'm talking about I'm talking about power generation. So yeah. let's go power generation because I do understand there are lots of other things which we can't decarbonize without doing that. Yeah, but
yeah. So certainly the use of hydrogen, I think that there's quite a bit of interest in using hydrogen production as a way of sort of helping with the essential system services market. So as I mentioned before, with having so much surplus rooftop solar, it's a really great way of actually absorbing that excess energy to help with the security of the system. So that's certainly a really interesting contribution that hydrogen production could be making to the overall security of the system. In terms of
in terms of when you say security of it, that's sort of going, okay, it's cheap. We've got negative prices during the day. Let's take that cheap energy and use it to store hydrogen that we're going to put away for the 5 or 10 day periods where renewable energy, we don't have enough wind. Is that the thought?
Yeah, I mean that's potentially what you can be doing, but really I'm just talking about the fact that your ins and outs need to equal each other at all times, and so with rooftop solar coming in and being unmanaged, it means it pushes other things off, other generation off the system, and so what you then find is, particularly when you're looking at, say, coal plant, if they're switching off, they take a long time to then sort of warm up and get back online. But
Yep.
of course, when it comes to rooftop solar, you do have disruptions to that. So if you've got some cloud cover coming over, or of course the sun goes down every night as well, you need other things in there to jump in.
Yeah, but
And
do you think though that it's still, for me on my numbers, it's like in terms of just during the day, like it's way cheaper to store the solar power in a traditional battery, or sorry, a lithium-ion battery, and then pump it out at night than what it is to take it, turn it into hydrogen, wait at night, burn it back into and create the power again. Like it's just like it's, I don't know, multiples cheaper to do it through a battery. Is that how you said or not?
Yeah, so it then depends like what you do once you've, so when I sort of talk about production of that hydrogen, so there's the opportunity to potentially put it into, say, a gas distribution system. Now, not getting into all of the technical issues then associated with putting hydrogen into a gas network, but I guess that's an opportunity for absorbing some of that excess energy and then putting it into the network, which can be used down the track. When it comes to the actual economics of using a hydrogen fuel cell, or storing that hydrogen and then, say, putting it through a generator, my understanding is that it's not economically efficient compared to use of, say, a lithium-ion battery. But in all of this, you need a bit of a mix. I think you touched on earlier around supply chains, and so making sure that you've got other options for what you can do as well. Whether or not it's at a residential application, though, I'm not sure. You could be looking at applications elsewhere.
No, but I mean, I completely get you on the whole hydrogen. Look, it'd be great to go, yeah, we've got some spare ones. Let's throw it aside for when we've got a 10-day period where we have no wind, and now we can burn that rather than running a diesel-fired generator or something like that. Yep, makes perfect sense to me. But yeah, I get the part as well that concerns me with that model on the hydrogen, with the model where you're saying, oh, let's take when we've got cheap energy, is that if I've created a hydrogen, something that uses electricity to create hydrogen, and I don't run it most of the time because the energy is not cheap enough, it's like, well, I've wasted all that capital for something I'm running, 3 hours a day when it happened to be really cheap and nobody else had their air conditioners on. Or as you said, I'm hardly using it at all in summer because everyone's got their air conditioners going, and I'm not using it in winter because everyone's got the heaters going. But I'm going gangbusters in spring. Is like, well, that doesn't seem like an efficient capital expenditure in terms of, like, that's going to make the numbers even worse than I guess I'm looking at numbers saying if I was producing hydrogen 100% of the time, how would it work? Whereas I just I have problems make the numbers stack up, and I worry. I guess I worry that say with Twiggy, he's obviously doing a lot in that space. That it's great to say let's do all this stuff to create these hydrogen electrolyzers, and get some government grants. But I just worry that there might be.
Yeah, and I guess that's kind of what it comes back to in terms of, like, there's lots of different uses for hydrogen, and what's the best economic case for that use. And so, with some of the really big hydrogen projects, it's very much focused on export, where they don't perhaps have the same suite of options that we have here in WA. And then also, recognizing that there's a whole bunch of industrial players that already use hydrogen in their processes, which is made from steam methane reformation. And so as they come under growing pressure to decarbonize, they need to look at, do we go through carbon capture and sequestration, or do we actually look at using renewable hydrogen there? So there's lots of different applications, and I think that the economics on those applications and how you make it is going to be different for each.
Yep. Dave?
Well, Katharine, you seem like a very nice person, and I don't. But But I can't let you go without giving you the opportunity for some Schadenfreude. So I'm just wondering, have you had any interesting moments over there as in your energy circles, staring east at the idiots who haven't reserved gas and whose grid is collapsing with rolling blackouts when, WA's done such a terrific job? Is there, have you sat there with the Premier or anyone else and they've just taken a moment to give us a good kicking?
Oh, look, you had it right. I'm far too nice to revel in Schadenfreude. Look, in all honesty, it is quite distressing to hear about the situation that the NEM is in at the moment, and I wouldn't wish that on them by any means. I think it's been, I guess, really validating and reassuring around some of the policy decisions that were made over the last 5 years in WA. As I said, when I went into working with the Minister for Energy, there was a lot of momentum around moving to the national electricity market, or at least the network regulation component of that. And there was also some policy that was being put in place to essentially, drive out generation that wasn't renewables because it was seen as being inefficient and driving out demand side management as well. And so we made the decision not to take those policy measures any further. And I think I copped quite a bit of slack for that from individuals that had worked on that. And so I got a text message from someone yesterday that did make the point that it must be quite nice sitting there to know that you didn't buckle under pressure, the minister didn't buckle under pressure. So it's nice to have that validation, and I think that there's policy decisions that were made a long time ago around gas reservation as well. And every time the Economic Regulation Authority, which is our equivalent of the AER in WA, every time it did its economic review, it sort of talked about how inefficient gas reservation policy is, and how it could potentially stifle future investment. And government made the decision to keep on with that reservation policy. So it's nice to know that they were the right decisions.
Yes,
so,
the person who you were effectively taxing by keeping it local, who wanted to explain why there'd be so much more gas if you just didn't tax them quite as much. Yeah, it's
well,
it's
very
surprise.
diplomatically put, Katharine. Thank you.
Excellent. We might. So thanks. I really appreciate you just having the extra time. Do you want to give a quick plug for your consultancy, and where can people get in contact? I guess if they're looking for more information on, if we've got when Chris Bowen listens to this podcast and wants to know where to get in contact, where he can hire you.
Hi, Chris. Thanks for tuning in. So as you mentioned in the intro, so my consulting practice is MACT Consulting, and I can be reached at katie@macconsulting.com.au.
We'll put the links in the show notes. Yeah. On that.
Absolutely. And if you're looking at how to navigate the policy associated with energy transition, or thinking sort of more broadly around what's happening with how do we decarbonize heavy industry, and what are some of the policy levers that need to be pulled in doing that, please get in touch. But otherwise, thank you all three of you for a really wonderful session.
Excellent. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for your time, Katharine.
You're welcome. Yeah, so now we've got our viewer question of the week. So this is for our viewers to have some discussion in the comment section over the coming days. The question for this week is the national energy market irreparably broken? So feel free to post your thoughts and engage with us and some of the other viewers over the coming days. So Damien, I'll hand it back to you just for the investment implications.
Yeah, sure. And actually, I've just got somebody just sent through a question as well that is actually interesting. While we've got Katharine here, I want to put you on the hook for this one. and because this is one, Dave's been banging on his blog about a bit, is saying, well, look, yes, we've got all these gas issues, and talk about gas reservation on the East Coast is, if we just declared force majeure and said, oh, well, things have changed, we're keeping some of the gas now, what are the legal issues for the government from doing that?
Well, so I think that, there's obviously reputational issues there, in terms of doing something like that. And the other thing is you'd need to look at the actual gas contracts to see how force majeure is actually defined as well in those contracts. So sometimes they can be quite narrowly defined. And then also in that, typically there's a requirement for you to mitigate the impacts as well. So I'm not sure that it would necessarily be as easy as just sort of calling force majeure. There are things that, could be done to work through this, but none of them are particularly easy, and all of them sort of come with those sort of reputational risks and sovereign risks. So, yeah, I might leave it there.
Yeah, no worries. That's it. You can pay for extra.
There's a fair volume. There's a fair volume of spot gas export on the East Coast, so you wouldn't necessarily have to break export contracts. Although you would certainly be facing some issues in terms of the gas producers.
So yes, so sorry. So jumping just to investment implications. Look, as we said, look, if there's no action, we said last time, if there's no action, then we're really just beginning this whole process, and I guess as best we can ascertain that we're really not seeing much action. Europe is the marginal price setter for energy at the moment, so prices remain high. We had Russia started to play around with the amount of energy that's putting through the pipeline that runs through the ocean. What's it called again? Nord Stream. Nord Stream 1 now. So Nord Stream 2 got built but never got turned on. Now they're starting to reduce some of the power, some of the gas that's going through Nord Stream 1. So look, we're at the beginning of the process. And if Australia is not going to make any put in any sort of taxes like you've seen in the UK to reduce, to offset the prices, and if we're not going to reserve the gas, which looks like we're not going to, then it looks like we're in for the higher energy prices for some time. And it probably means that I think, as we spoke about last time we ran this, it could double energy prices on the East Coast, and that sort of means energy prices are about 3% of the economy, so it probably means an extra 3% of inflation, which is going to keep interest rates high, and more reason for things like house prices to fall, and quite possibly a recession.
Yeah, it sounds like a really good reason for WA to get its own central bank as well.
Yeah, well, and actually it is a very interesting implication for WA in terms of saying if you haven't got the inflation because the energy prices haven't flown through, but
should you get the rate rises?
You cop the rate rises, and we cop the rate rises. You absolutely will. Yeah. Yeah. Excellent.
Right.
Thanks.
Excellent. Okay, so that almost wraps us up. So Katharine, just want to thank you once again for coming on the show. It's been an absolute pleasure, and we just want to wish you all the best for the future.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. It was great.
Thanks, Katharine.
Thanks.
Excellent. And Damien, Dave, I know you guys have been talking about this issue for a long time, and it looks like there's going to be plenty to talk about in the future because not much is happening. So I'm sure we'll continue this discussion in the future.
Sadly. Yes.
Okay, nice one. So we do welcome your feedback on the podcast, especially in regards to future topics. So if you do have any ideas, please drop it in the comments section below, or send us an email at contact@nucleuswealth.com. Don't forget to like the video now. And finally, if you know of anyone who might get some value out of today's episode, we'd really appreciate it if you can please share it with them. Also, if you'd like to see more of our previous episodes and content, head over to nucleuswealth.com/content. And to stay up to date with news from us, you can also follow us on all major social media. So for myself, Damien, Dave, Katherine, and the rest of the team at Nucleus Wealth, thanks for watching, and we look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.